Let's study about friction. What is friction? That is the force that resists the motion. Like if you are pushing the box forward, the surface is trying to resist the motion of the box. So this is what we call as friction, a force that opposes motion when two surfaces are in contact and it acts in the opposite direction of the movement. We have different types of this friction, such as static friction, limiting friction, and the dynamic friction. Static friction is when you try pushing the object and it still does not move. During that time, the friction applied by the surface is known as static friction. But once you feel like the object is going to move or it's going to start moving, that's when we have reached the maximum static friction, which is also known as the limiting frictional force. And then the object would start to move. That is, we call the dynamic friction. This dynamic friction is less than our static friction. So if we look at a graph of our values, this is how it would be. In the static region, the body would not move. The object would be at rest. And then once we reach the limiting friction, which is the highest or the maximum static friction, now the object would start moving. And if you would see the kinetic region, we call it kinetic because the movement has begun. So this is dynamic friction where the body would be in continuous motion. Next, we know some factors which can affect friction are the nature of the surface and the normal reaction force. The surface area of contact does not affect the friction. And if we see a practical methods of how this friction is applied, let me show you all some example. So let's see. There's the box. And then, according to Newton's law, if there is no any unbalanced force, the body would remain at rest. And if I apply a force when there's an unbalanced force, the object would be in a continuous motion with a uniform velocity. But unfortunately, here, once we apply an unbalanced force, the object is coming to a stop. This is the reason why we say friction has worked here. So due to friction, this box has stopped moving. Okay, so we said the friction would depend on two things: nature of the surface as well as the normal reaction. So if I add another box on top of it and start applying a force, initially if there was one box, please look at this carefully, where we reach the static friction, 33 Newton friction, and we applied a force of 33 Newton. Now we are applying 41 Newtons, the static friction is also 41 Newtons. 77 Newtons, still the static friction. Still our static friction is working. So once you pass on the limiting friction, now if you would see the 94 Newton of the friction force is actually our dynamic friction, and the dynamic friction is constant even if you start increasing your force. Now what if I increase the friction in the surface? The object would come to rest quicker because the surface, the nature of the surface, and the weight of the object is going to affect our friction. But does the contact area, that is, even if it's a bigger space contacting the surface or a small just feet contacting the surface, it is not going to differentiate our friction. If we move on to our next points, what are the examples of friction? If you look at this, why do we need friction in life? It's because it helps you in walking, It helps in the braking systems in vehicle. Even to write, you had to have this friction, and to hold any objects, you use a friction. So, is it only advantage? Do we have any disadvantages of friction? Yes, we do. A lot of our energy is wasted as heat in the machines. It can cause more damages, such as we had to replace the machine every now and then it's also reducing the efficiency. But can we minimize these friction disadvantages? Yes, we can use oil, grease, or powder. This is called as lubrication. And by polishing surfaces, we can reduce the friction. By using ball bearings, the machine can work by converting the sliding friction into rolling friction. If we look at more examples to understand how this friction is working in our life, walking and running, we use the friction. The paper we use a pencil to write on it. Due to friction, we are able to retain the ink to the paper. While braking, we use the same scenario of friction and for holding objects. So in mechanical industrials, we have the car tires on the road to prevent slipping, and we use sandpaper to polish surfaces. For engines and machines, we use some lubrications to prevent it. Then in nature, what happens is, if the river flow is very high, we won't be able to use that water flow, but due to large rocks there, there will be a slowness in that, and that is a good river catchment there. And the birds flying, due to air friction, their speed and the movement would decrease. And the meteors at the outer space, due to air friction, when the meteors are coming to Earth's atmosphere, with the air friction, they heat up and burn. So for sports, we know athletes would use shoes with spikes on them, so that can increase the grip. And in bowling ball on the lanes, we have a smoother ball, so it can reduce the friction and makes the ball roll faster. So with that, we come to the summary of friction. Friction is the opposing of motion. We have three types such as static, limiting, and dynamic. It is usually affected by the normal weight and the surface roughness, the nature of the surface, and it both has both advantage and disadvantages. Thank you.